This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, high-performance cloud hosting for everyone. Visit linode.com/MacVoices and take $20 off your first server package. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this time we're going to talk about a tough subject, a subject that none of us really want to address too much, but we really need to, and the need is increasing. And that subject is malware. And I'm happy to welcome to talk about malware, along with any other security topics that come up, Josh Long of Intego, Chief Security Analyst for Intego. Josh, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thanks. Great to be on the show, Chuck. Appreciate it. Appreciate you having me here.
Well, I appreciate you having taking the time to come on, because this is one of those topics that it's sort of like passwords. Everybody knows about it. Everybody hears about it, and nobody really wants to do anything about it. And I think that I'm afraid the days of sticking in our heads in the sand as Mac users about malware are probably over.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair statement, I would say. I think just in June, there were half a dozen different varieties of Mac malware that either were just discovered for the first time, or there was a new and interesting, unique variant of them. So that's kind of a significant thing that I think the average Mac user doesn't really realize that there are threats out there, and that these things are not necessarily something that you only get from browsing shady websites and things like that.
And that's a really key point, I think, because there are a lot of folks I know that, well, I don't engage in this activity or that activity, and therefore I'm safe. Or I get all my software from the Mac App Store, so I'm safe. And definitely if it's the latter, well, if it's either one of those, you probably have improved your odds, but you've certainly you're not guaranteed to win the game.
Right, that's true. Yeah, even with the Mac App Store, you do have to be careful about what you choose to download, because there are, basically anybody can become a developer. It's not terribly difficult to get an app approved and available in an app store, in the Apple app stores. And so it is something that people should be aware of. They shouldn't automatically trust that just because it's in the app store and it's vetted by Apple, that means it's totally safe, and I have no reason to be in any way concerned about it. There actually have been, in both the iOS and Mac OS app stores, there have been cases where there was software that did a lot of things to violate people's privacy. There have even been, in the Mac App Store, there have previously been apps that were caught scraping, your browser history from whatever browsers you were using, and then sending them off to a remote server, in some cases in China. That's kind of scary. How did that ever get past the App Store review process? You hear about all these legitimate apps that get rejected for sometimes what seems like silly reasons. And then you have apps like that somehow got past the review process. So,
yeah, and first of all, the review process. I mean, it's interesting to hear folks complain about some of these things. One minute, the developers are screaming we need faster review process. We got to get it through. We got to get it through. And then you see Apple getting beat up because they did let something get through accidentally. I mean, if there was a thorough, absolute vetting of these apps, you probably wouldn't get apps out for weeks. So I'm not giving Apple a pass on that, but at the same time, it's just not realistic. And the other thing is, some of these programmers have been pretty darn clever about the way they've hidden things, and so they find ways around some of the checks that Apple does. So that there's that. But also, I'm going back a little bit farther, but sometimes even legitimate apps from legitimate developers not in the App Store can be a vector for infection. And I'm thinking about, am I making this up? Was it Handbrake? That if you downloaded a version of Handbrake, that there was something that came along with it that really shouldn't have?
Right. There have been things like that that happened with Handbrake, with Transmission, and a number of other apps. And sometimes what that is that uh, sometimes the download site gets taken over. Um, Sometimes it's the developer's website that gets taken over by an attacker, and then they'll change out the links. In other cases, there have been sites, good legitimate sites like Mac Update that distribute, that have download links available for all the popular Mac apps. And in some cases, the editors there or other download directories have gotten sort of tricked into putting up links that it turns out go to trojanized, hacked versions of these apps that do more than they're supposed to actually do and do some kind of malicious things on your system. So yeah, honestly, it is a bit scary to think about, like, who can we trust? Where can we go to get apps and know that whatever we're going to get from them is really legitimate and is not going to have any kind of malware or other things attached to it that we didn't expect.
Okay, so now that we've scared everyone and determined that there's really no safe place to get software, and folks, we're probably overstating the fact a little bit there, but it's a good example of how it can happen, and how even the most reputable company can get tricked or fooled, or it's not even necessarily it's not even a case that they were negligent. That's a key point in my mind, is that there are times that, yes, some websites, some places have been very negligent or possibly even complicit. And then there are other times that just that somebody got by them. The lock got picked and something got stuck in where it shouldn't be. But how do we protect ourselves? I mean, the obvious things: don't visit the porn sites, don't visit the torrenting sites, don't visit the piracy sites. Those are all obvious. But what are the less obvious things we can do to protect ourselves?
There are really a lot of things I think that we can do to protect ourselves. There's, in it's not typically called antivirus software anymore, although that's kind of the popular name that most people think about. But endpoint protection software is important. And that can include antivirus, that can include other things as well. Firewall software, VPNs, virtual private networks. That's another important thing, especially from a privacy point of view, particularly when you're browsing the internet or really doing anything on the internet when you're in a remote location away from your home, a trusted network. There are some freeware apps that are available that are also really useful to install. That have some really good security benefits. In particular, I'm thinking of like the Objective C tools, and that's Objective SEE, not the letter C, the programming language. Patrick Wardle makes a number of free utilities that are also really good. The one caveat on that is you kind of have to be a little bit more of an advanced user to really understand how to use some of his apps properly. So it's not necessarily something you can install on, a relative's computer to help keep them safe without giving them at least a tutorial and kind of advising them on how to use some of these tools. But yeah, I think that's software is one thing that you can do. You can put all of these different programs on your computer, and they will protect you in certain ways, security and privacy wise. But there's another aspect to this. It has more to do with, rather than software that you can put on your machine, it's just a general understanding of what the threats are and how to avoid them. And so that comes into education. And how do you educate yourself? How do you find out what the threats are and how to avoid them? And also there's a question of, well, does the average person really have time to invest in educating themselves and figuring out all the ways that they could get hacked and things like that? So there is a bit of a problem here. And there are a number of other things that we could even talk about too, as far as staying on the latest version of Mac OS. That's a really important thing to do. Apple typically, Apple's pattern is that they'll release security updates for the current and two previous versions of Mac OS. And however, I've observed that sometimes those two previous versions don't necessarily always get patches that could easily be made available to those users. Sometimes Apple chooses to only patch certain things that may affect older versions of Mac OS, but they only patch them on the current version. So stay on the latest version of Mac OS. That's a really important tip. Install those security updates when Apple pushes them out. Those are a couple of other things that you can do.
Okay. Because I have a couple places I want to go, but that's down the line. I would take me back to the antivirus, anti-malware software for a minute, and taking nothing away from the free tools that you just mentioned. One of the things that strikes me is this feels like one of those utilities that needs to be updated constantly, because the bad guys are constantly introducing new variants. And as I understand the virus world, sometimes these things mutate on their own, just like real viruses, and turn into something that is a little bit different than maybe the anti-malware is programmed to protect you from. So, is this something that we need to be constantly downloading definitions for or updates to feel that we are as safe as we can be?
That's a good question. I think most antivirus products will automatically download definition updates. The best products will not just be a sort of scan once and remove stuff and then don't worry about it for a while until you start wondering if maybe you're infected again. The best products will actually be constantly running in the background, which, I mean, some people automatically right there go, oh, well, that means it's going to slow down my computer. That's not necessarily the case. I think, people don't realize we have super fast machines these days. And you have a lot of processes running in the background as part of the operating system, as part of other apps that you're running. Antivirus software, at least good antivirus software, in my opinion, doesn't really put a heavy strain on your computer anymore. Maybe in fact, that was true, to be honest. I mean, that was true maybe 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. It's really not the case anymore. We've got fast machines, and software is getting written better than it used to. So I would say that's not really something that people should be too concerned about. Do try out, an antivirus product, and if you feel like it's slowing down your computer, then consider trying another product, but because it really shouldn't slow down your computer that much. Antivirus software should automatically update its definitions. That might be on a daily basis, an hourly, however often the company releases an update. Those updates will get pushed out to your Mac, so it'll get those updates. So it's not something that people usually should have to worry too much about.
Today's edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Linode. You can build it on Linode. Here are the facts about Linode. Linode is a virtual cloud server service that lets you build the server you need in the cloud. And not just any server, but a server that suits your specific needs. From a $5 per month Nanode plan, the whole way up to a full-blown, dedicated, custom server with native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and an industry-leading processor. Get up and running in a matter of minutes, not hours or days. Pick a plan, pick a distro, pick a location. That's it. Your server is online. Speaking of location, Linode has 10 worldwide data centers, including the newest in Toronto and one opening soon in Mumbai. So if geography is an issue for you, it isn't an issue with Linode. Linode also comes with a ton of one-click installs for things like WordPress, VPN servers, Minecraft servers, and many more. So getting up and running with a specific type of server is quick and easy. Need multiple servers? Not only can Linode handle that for you, but their easy-to-use dashboard makes management easy, just as easy as their monitoring and backing up of your server. And of course, service is always an issue. Linode has 24/7 customer support that is always just a phone call away. Now you know the facts about Linode. Okay, maybe not all the facts, but that should get you started. Visit linode.com/MacVoices to round out your knowledge, and while you're there, use the code MacVoices to get $20 credit on your first Linode server. That's $20 credit at linode.com/MacVoices, and a big thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices.
So the other concern that I hear raised about malware software or antivirus software is that not only it potentially slows down my machine, but it also is going to make my machine less stable. It's going to prevent me from doing things that I want to do on the internet. Any truth to that, or is that a concern that is just part of the game that you have to live with it?
Well, and a related concern to that, I've heard, some prominent podcasters talk about how, I don't think that anyone should run antivirus software at all because it also opens up security vectors. I've even heard that argument before. Just because, a couple of antivirus programs out there, even some from big developers, have at times there's been a vulnerability discovered in like their scanning engine. The way that they scan files on your machine could potentially be exploited by somebody who knew how to exploit it. But these are all things that I think when you hear these kind of arguments, they need to be taken with a grain of salt. Sure, there's probably some truth to those things, but really any software that you're running on your machine could potentially make your machine a little bit less stable. But if you're using reputable software from a well-known developer, which you should be, especially for something like antivirus software, but really any software that you use, you should be trusting a developer that's been around for a while, that knows what they're doing, that has a very good reputation. But typically, if you're using software with a good reputation, it's going to be stable. If it's not stable, if it's going to make your Mac crash a lot, you'll be able to find out about that. Look at reviews of the various programs that are out there, whatever program you might want to select to protect you, and see what other people are saying about it. I think that's, it always has been and still is, I think, a good metric. And it's a good way to kind of find out if some of those programs really are unstable and might cause problems for your computer.
Now, another thing that we constantly talk about here on MacVoices, and I think just about anybody that is interested in security and privacy, is that we encourage folks to use VPNs. Sometimes at home, most definitely when you're not at home. But that does not mean that you are immune from malware.
That's true. Yeah, there are certain things that a VPN will protect you from. Some of them are security related things. Some of them are privacy related things. If you are concerned that your internet service provider might be spying on your activity, then you could use a VPN even at home, and there are definitely some benefits to doing that. The main thing that I like to use a VPN for, and let people know that this is a really good use case for it, is when you're out in public, when you connect to those open Wi-Fi networks, right? You see these a lot in restaurants and just a lot of places. Hotels often will have open Wi-Fi, meaning that when you connect to that network, you're not having to put in a password to connect to it. In some cases, even networks where you have to type in a password, if they're WEP, the old WEP encryption protocol, those are also not secure. And so just because you're having to type in a password to connect to a Wi-Fi network doesn't mean that they're a secure Wi-Fi network. And on open networks and web encrypted networks, it's the type of situation where basically anybody on your local network could potentially see some of the things that you're doing, could potentially even attack your computer while it's on that network in certain ways. Just as an example, somebody might be able to find out what websites you're visiting through DNS-related attacks and things like that. So when you're on an untrusted network, and any public network like this is a network that you shouldn't be fully trusting, then a VPN is useful, because what it does is it creates an encrypted tunnel between your computer and the VPN server. So, any requests that your computer makes out to the internet have to go through this tunnel. Anything coming into your computer comes through the same encrypted tunnel. So, a proper VPN will also protect your DNS queries. DNS is the technology where you look up a website, it automatically kind of happens in the background. So if you type in apple.com, there's really an IP address, 17 dot something dot something dot something, that is really going on behind the scenes. You don't need to remember that numerical IP address, because DNS does that translation for you. DNS is one way that sometimes information can leak. And so a good VPN will also push those DNS queries also over the same encrypted network. Now, one thing that's also important to know about VPNs is that you have to choose your VPN provider carefully, because there are a lot of free VPNs out there. And one of the things that, you have to think about it from this perspective. Like there's costs involved in creating software. There's costs involved in running a network. And so if you're not having to pay for a service like a VPN, where there's a ton, all of your data is going through this network, then what's really going on there, right? Are you the product? You probably are in some way or other. And so, you want a VPN that you have to pay for. Sometimes some of us don't like to pay for things. I tend to be kind of cheap in that regard. I don't really like to pay for a lot of things if I don't have to, but a VPN is something you really have to pay for, because you don't want to go with some sketchy fly-by-night, VPN service, because that's really not protecting your privacy after all. So choose a reputable provider that has good reviews, and pay for it. You can also use a VPN at home. I mentioned kind of the common scenario of using them in public, but you can use them at home too. It's not necessarily even just if you're concerned that your ISP may be spying on you. Maybe you're concerned that your government is spying on you, depending on where you live. Many VPN services will have sort of an exit node, a server that's located in another country. And so you can tunnel from your computer out to another country and visit the internet exactly as you would see it in that country. So there's many, many use cases for a VPN, but those are just a few of them.
I'm so glad to hear somebody else encourage people to pay for some of these things. I'm like you, free is great, but I always worry about free, because somewhere the bills have to get paid. Yeah. And that's and a VPN is a prime example, because at some point you're coming out of that tunnel somewhere, somehow, and that means that somebody is potentially watching, and you try to figure out, okay, what are their interests? If there's somebody that's selling a VPN and they have a good reputation, and for heaven's sake, folks, there are plenty of places to go out there and do a research on the top VPNs as rated by some very reputable websites and reputable organizations. Check those out. I hesitate to recommend any. I know I have my favorites, but you should go and make the decisions for yourself. But at the end of the day, somebody is going to see you coming out of that tunnel. And you just have to figure out, is it somebody that you're comfortable with seeing you come out of that tunnel?
Right. Yeah. Well, and those are some really good points, because, when you're talking about connecting to a VPN server that's located in another country, you may also want to think about, what does that country do to spy on, or observe the traffic that's going on in their country as well. So that's another thing you do need to think about. My personal recommendation, and this is a related brand to Intego, but CyberGhost VPN is what I personally use and recommend. But of course, it makes sense that I would recommend them because they're a related company. But
Sure.
I really like CyberGhost in terms of the technologies that they have. They check all the boxes. Some of the things to look for when you're looking for a VPN are, what is their logging policy? This is important because a lot of people think that this is just if you're going to be doing bad things on the internet using it through a VPN. I want to make sure nobody logs in. Well, it's a lot more than just that, because there's also, there may be government requests. There may be hackers who try to get into the VPN provider and obtain the logs. If something like that were to happen, then it could be something where you're not doing anything bad, immoral, illegal, but somebody's still able to potentially spy on where you've been on the internet. And so having a no log policy, I think, is something that's very important from a privacy perspective. Not all VPN companies can do that, depending on what country they're based in and whatever the local laws are there and various other things like that. Some of them choose to store logs for a short period of time. I prefer to use one that doesn't have any logs about where I've been on the internet. It's just one of many things, and as you said, there's some great review sites out there that compare a lot of different VPN products. Some of those sites are sponsored, so do be aware of that. Look for a footnote on the page that explains whether some of those things may have promotional consideration. But there are some good VPN review sites and good sites that will kind of give you a list of what things to look for in a VPN.
Josh, I'm afraid at this point we're starting to sound a little paranoid. Both of us, and it's a matter of educating people and informing them. This is not something that I think you have to think about every single day. It's one of those things that it's almost like, okay, you get your locks changed on your house, and as long as you bought a good reputable lock, you probably aren't going to need to change it for a while. Or it's that's not the best analogy, but it's at least it's a start. There's some things that they do need to be updated, but when you're purchasing anything, I think you should do the research, and VPNs especially, and antivirus software and malware software. All these things need to be researched and checked out, and because I don't know that there's necessarily objectively one that's better than another. There's a tier that is at the top of products, and then there are those that are not the top tier. I want the top tier, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of reason, I guess, to be a little bit paranoid. I mean, I think a certain level of paranoia is healthy. There's certainly a point where you can just get really crazy and think that everyone is spying on you, and that may not necessarily always be healthy. But it is good, I think, personally, to sort of maintain a healthy level of skepticism and maybe a little bit of paranoia. Sure, this is this is my bread and butter, right? This is what I love doing. I love researching security topics and talking about them. The reason why I think it's so important to talk about these things, even though they're a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, it can be a little bit scary to sort of think about all the ways that people can spy on you. The different ways that your computer can be hacked and things like that. But at the same time, I think it's important to be aware of some of these things, just because if you stick your head in the sand and just kind of pretend that, I'm a Mac user, so I don't need to worry about viruses and malware. I don't need to worry about, security and privacy. Apple's all about privacy, right? That's their their marketing thing that they go around telling everybody. Oh yeah, privacy, privacy, privacy. We're all about that. But there are certain things that Apple does to protect our privacy that I'm very appreciative about. There are other things that where they could be doing better. Um, and these are things that everybody who uses the internet, which is basically everybody in the world almost, right? Everybody uses the internet, really needs to have at least some better awareness about how to protect themselves. And kind of a related thing, like when we're talking about protecting our security, our privacy, I think it's very important that people realize that most people have kind of heard don't reuse passwords, right? Um, it goes a little bit beyond that. So I think a lot of people just have a tendency to have 2 or 3 passwords. I've heard a lot of people tell me that they do this. They're like, oh yeah, well, I have a password that I use for my bank, and and maybe I reuse it on other financial related sites, and then that's my tier 1 password, and then I've got like a tier 2 password that I use for sites where it would be kind of bad if somebody got into that account, and then I've got like a tier 3 password that I use for sites that I don't really care about. The problem with that is if any one of those sites, from any one of those tiers gets hacked, your password may potentially become public knowledge. It may even be specifically tied to your username and your password, or your username or your email address, whatever you're using to log in. And then there are hackers who will intentionally grab those databases of leaked credentials, and then they'll use those even through automated software to try to log into many other websites using those same credentials. So this is why you can't even necessarily rely on just having a few passwords that you use everywhere. So Intego does not make a password manager, so I have no skin in this game, but I definitely recommend that people use a password manager as well. And just like we said about antivirus software, VPNs, you want to make sure that you do your research and that you're using a very trusted, reputable name, somebody who's been doing this for a while and really knows what they're doing. So I'm sure all of your viewers, listeners have heard of some of these, but there's 1Password, Dashlane, many others. I could list others too, but those are some of the popular ones. LastPass is another one that a lot of people use. You definitely want to make sure when you're storing your passwords, you don't want to stick them someplace where there's not good security controls. So make sure that you carefully select a password manager as well, and use a unique password for every service that you use. It can be kind of a pain in the butt, and I know people are also have the concern of, well, what happens if something happens to my password manager? Maybe somebody finds my master password somehow, and now they have access to all my passwords. That's a fair concern. At the same time, I think there's a much greater possibility that some of your accounts are going to be compromised if you're not using unique passwords on every site, because again, those passwords are going to leak. One thing that I recommend to people is to sign up for alerts at Have I Been Pwned, spelled PWNED.com. That's a site where you can put in your email address and get notifications whenever that email address has shown up in a data breach. And you might be surprised that these things happen a lot more than we tend to hear about on the news. We hear about big ones. We hear about, data breaches from companies like Target. If Apple had a data breach, everybody would know about it. It would be on the nightly news and all that. You don't hear about some of these smaller websites that get breached. And so signing up for, and this is a free service, you put in your email address, they don't spam you, but they will alert you if first of all, when you first put in your email address on the site, they'll actually tell you you're in all these data breaches. So be aware of that. And then if you've used passwords at any of these sites and you haven't changed them, do it. And then, of course, also, if you are reusing that password on any other sites, make sure to change it on all those other sites as well. So have it been pwned is another, and that's a free service that I definitely recommend that people sign up for.
Okay, so I'm so glad you brought that up because I've heard that recommendation before. And the immediate, my gut reaction is it's a free service. Okay, that's not good because, how are they paying for it? Second is who are the people that are running this? Because now they're not asking me for a password, but they're asking me for an email address. And as you said, they're going out there and they're telling me I'm in all these data breaches. So am I making myself a more attractive target because for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifferent, my fault or not, now I've been identified as an individual who has an email address and these passwords out there are known. And so am I selecting myself for trouble?
No, it's a great question. The way that the site works, the guy who runs the site is Troy Hunt, and he is a security researcher. By day, he works, I think, for Microsoft. He's a very reputable guy. He speaks at a lot of security conferences, and he so portions of the site, obviously, he has to pay for running the site, and some of that is donated from some partner companies that he works with. 1Password, I think, actually works with him among other companies as well. So they sort of help fund the site and keep it going. Interestingly, he is actually looking to, I think he announced recently that he's looking for kind of somebody to take over some of the operations of the site. He's been running the site basically by himself for many years. And so, hopefully somebody really good, and I'm sure he'll vet whoever it is who ends up maybe taking over some of those duties related to the site. So I don't think there's too much to worry about there. But because of the way the site operates, basically, there's data breaches, there's data dumps that are out there, and if a hacker wants to try to break into people's accounts, they go and find these password databases, these dumped credentials, and they download them all to their computer. They can even use automated software, as I mentioned, to try to log in as you on multiple other websites besides the ones that are specifically in the breach to see if you've reused your password anywhere. It's not necessarily always a targeted attack. Sometimes this is just the sort of thing that people might want to hack into a bunch of email accounts just so they can send out spam from an existing email address that has contacts, that has people in their contacts list. It certainly looks more legitimate if you're getting a link in an email from somebody that you know. So if that email is coming from somebody that you know and they're sending you a link, that's a lot more likely to get clicked on than just spam coming from anywhere else. So this is just one example of why people might want to hack into your accounts. But when you're putting your email address into Have It Been Pwned, your email address is already in those databases. And by signing up for the notification service, that doesn't make you any more or less of a target. But it does give you the ability to sort of find out when some of these breaches happen, because there's not too many breach notification services like this. And this one will specifically let you know your information was found in a breach. So if you happen to see a headline, you can be a little more confident in knowing whether your information was or was not in that breach.
One more way to make us paranoid.
Yeah. I have a tendency to do that when I talk about security topics, but
yeah, well, again, I mean, it's one of those things. If you use a little bit of common sense, that we've said this too, and I don't know if you agree with this, but part of my theory is if I just can make myself a less attractive target, let the bad guys go and pick on the easy targets. I'll make myself just a little harder target, and so I may not be absolutely secure, but I, it's like leaving your door unlocked. Okay, if my door's unlocked, if somebody's going around the neighborhood trying the doors, and I'm the unlocked one, that they're gonna walk in. So if I lock my door, they're going to at least move on to somebody else and try it first. And so,
Right.
it's the old joke about, I only have to run faster than you, not faster than the bear.
Exactly.
But
Yeah,
no, but
that is true for a lot of types of attacks. I think that is true. You don't want to be the low hanging fruit that's really easy for anyone to target. At the same time, like I mentioned, it's not necessarily always targeted attacks. Sometimes it's just sort of, if your information happens to be in a data breach, somebody may not care about you at all. This is a very common misconception, I think, about, all variety of attacks, whether it's malware. People think, oh, nobody's going to be targeting me. Why would they want to, hack into my webcam? Or, why would somebody want to, send me a phishing email? It's a lot of times it's not really that somebody's specifically targeting you. A lot of times they don't care who you are. They don't care if you are somebody of any significance, to the, I don't know, celebrity or anything like that. But the more accounts that they can compromise, and again, they're doing this in an automated fashion much of the time. So they don't really care about you. They don't. They certainly, don't care if you get hacked. They don't even need to know who you are. And so that's another thing to be aware of. It's not necessarily that you need to be concerned about people who might be targeting you, because a lot of times everybody's the target. Or another way to put it, nobody's the target. It's just, they're taking the opportunity to take advantage of whatever accounts they can find their way into.
Before we wrap up, there's one other topic I wanted to definitely touch on, because it seems to be popping up more and more in the news at a high profile level, and that's the issue of ransomware. Is this a specific type of malware or virus? And how do you feel about it? Because it seems like I'm reading more and more about people that are just paying, and big companies too, not as much individuals necessarily, but big companies that are saying it's worth paying the ransom to get their data unlocked, which is a little terrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's kind of unnerving to hear about a lot of people paying these ransoms, because of course, if these people who are holding computers and networks for ransom are getting paid, at least some of the time, it may be financially worthwhile for them to continue that practice of trying to hold other things for ransom. So it's sort of, it's definitely a problem. One of the things that I think people can do to sort of not have to worry as much about ransomware is make sure that you have good backups. Use backup software. You should have a local backup. You should also have a cloud backup. But when you have these backups set up, one of the things that's really important to make sure is that you have either or more than one of these things, either an offline backup that's very recent, meaning something that's not constantly connected to your computer. If you think about it, ransomware that might infect your computer could infect anything that you might have access to when you sit down at your computer. So if you're sitting down and you can pull up your external hard drive that has all your time machine backups on it, well, guess what? So can ransomware. Ransomware can potentially encrypt all of your time machine backups, and that wouldn't be so great. And then the other thing is with cloud backups. If you don't have multiple versions in the cloud, then you could end up with a situation where maybe the most recent backup to that service was the encrypted version that you can't access because it's encrypted by ransomware. That's obviously not going to do you any good either. So understanding how these attacks work is a good first step into kind of figuring out how to have more effective backups in place to be able to avoid ransomware, or to be able to recover from it maybe more accurately. So that's an important thing. Make sure if you're using online backup services or even network based, if you're at a company maybe that has backups onto a server that the company owns, make sure that their IT people are are backing up the backups, and have some of those backups that are completely offline, off the network, or that they have a versioning system in place. So if your ransomware encrypted file gets backed up, they can say, "Oh, no problem. We've got the version from yesterday, so you're fine." Those are some important things, I think, in order to not have to worry so much about ransomware. Ransomware is it's just like any other malware in the sense that it's something that can infect anybody's machine. Sometimes it gets on there, just because maybe you clicked on a rogue link in a Google search result. A lot of times people make the assumption that you have to, sort of go to sketchy places online. One of the types of malware that just recently we discovered was we call Crescent Core. And the first place that we found this malware was on one of those sketchy kind of sites. It was a site that claimed to offer freely downloadable versions of the latest comic books. And so obviously that's a copyright violation and something that you should expect to find malicious software and scams and other things and links on those kind of sites. But we found a second variant, actually, as we were kind of coming up with the name for this software or for this malware. We were searching, doing some Google searches because I wanted to make sure that Crescent Core wasn't like something, that other people were using. It wasn't a brand name or somebody's personal nickname or something like that, And so I did a Google search for Crescent Core, and one of the links on the very first page of results was a link that redirected through a whole bunch of other sites and ultimately landed on a page where it downloaded the Crescent Core malware. So that's how we decided, okay, well, definitely that's the name we're giving it, because how cool is that? Like we found a second variant just by searching for that name, which, by the way, that name was not found anywhere in the malware. We kind of came up with it by combining a couple of words that we found related to the malware. But so the reason I bring this up is because, again, this is a Google search result. This is the first page. It's not like we were going and digging around through like second, third, 10th pages, of Google search results. This was on the first page. This is one of like the top links on the page, which is what most people click on when they go and do a Google search. I've actually observed this in the past. About 10 years ago, I think it was, there was a TV show called So You Think You Can Dance. And my wife was searching for, to find out who the winners were on a particular night or something. And so she did a Google search. Again, very similar thing. It's still happening today. First page of results, there was a link that looked like it might have the answers, and it redirected to it was a fake antivirus or a fake Flash player, and one of those things that will infect your computer. And a related thing to that, this is another thing that's important to know to keep yourself safe and to share with other people to help them to stay safe. One, you don't need Flash Player anymore. Flash Player is essentially dead and gone. So if you get a website that's trying to tell you need to update your Flash Player, don't believe it, and don't install whatever they're trying to give you, because most likely it's malware. that's disguising itself as Flash Player. We call that a Trojan horse. And so you want to avoid Flash players that are trying to get pushed on you by a website. Not legitimate. Another thing that you might see is fake, virus alerts. A web page might sometimes even look like a Mac dialog box that's telling you, hey, your system is infected. We found viruses on your computer. This is not something that you should ever see when you're browsing the web. If you do, it's a scam site. And if you click on that, click on whatever it is on that page, it's going to try to download that scam software on your computer. It might tell you that it's a legitimate antivirus, and it might tell you it found 1,000 viruses on your computer, but it's really a scam. And they're just doing that to try to get you to give over your credit card information so that they can have fun with that. So don't download Flash Player. If any website tells you need to update your Flash Player, just forget about it, because websites don't really rely on it anymore. And web browsers typically will block Flash Player by default because nobody really needs it anymore. Adobe actually has given a cutoff date by the end of 2020. They're not releasing any more updates for Flash Player, no more security updates or anything. So you don't need it. Don't download it.
Good advice. Good advice. I hope we haven't made folks paranoid, but I hope we've made them just a little more aware of a few things they need to pay attention to, and a few products they can invest in that will make them just a little bit more secure. And again, make yourself not the low-hanging fruit. Let somebody else have the problems, not you. Josh, Intego, what is the best way for folks to reach you and to find out everything that Intego can do to improve their security?
Sure. I think the best place to find out about Intego is intego.com, intego.com. Intego has been around for a long time. 1997 is when the company was founded. So, and we're still focused, dedicated to the Mac. So in my opinion, of course, that's one of the brands that you can trust. So intego.com, we have a blog there, the Mac Security blog, where we have a lot of great articles. We try to keep people informed about the latest threats. We also have a podcast, which Chuck, you were on recently, and people can listen to that. It's a weekly podcast. We talk about all of these sort of security and privacy related things that every Apple user should know. And of course, when you go to intego.com, you can find links to our social media pages. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and other places as well. And then if you want to follow me, I'm the Josh Meister on most networks. I'm at the Josh Meister on Twitter.
Great. Josh, thanks so much for the time and for the education. There's a lot there, and it's a fast developing world, and we'll get you back to, because there are a couple other topics I'd love to hit, and I'm sure there'll be updates by then, because there always are.
Always, yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chuck.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. I hope this gave you a little something to think about. We don't want to make you scared. We don't want to make you paranoid, even if we are. We just want you to be safe out there. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.